The first crack in a family isn't loud. It's a whisper, quick, sharp, and impossible to unhear. Mine came the morning the sheriff stepped onto my parents' porch in the quiet suburb of Ravenshaw, papers in hand, asking for me. No shouting, no dramatic collapse, just the brittle silence of people realizing the world they controlled was no longer theirs, and that I was the one who had pulled the first loose thread. I didn't defend myself, didn't soothe them. I simply moved aside and let the truth settle like ash. Because a week before, at Northcrest Airport, I finally learned what my parents truly thought of me. 1 cancelled ticket, 2 messages, and the moment their words lit up my screen, something old and aching inside me cracked open. An old wound I'd pretended wasn't still bleeding. If you had met me a few years back, you might have assumed I came from one of those loud, affectionate families that linger over pancakes on weekend mornings. People used to tell me I had a warm face, the kind shaped by gentleness. I never corrected them. Why ruin the illusion? It was easier than admitting the truth. My family loved control more than they ever loved me. Growing up, my mother treated my older sister Sarah like a rare artifact, the family's treasured exhibit. New clothes, a room drenched in soft lights and pastel bedding, framed photos lining every hallway like a curated shrine. And me? I got lectures on gratitude, hand-me-downs that still smelled like someone else's detergent, and a place on the floor during holidays because chairs were for guests. Revenge wasn't something I fantasized about back then, but every slight, every dismissal, every tiny humiliation layered itself inside me like sediment, quiet, heavy, waiting. My father wasn't the one who set the emotional fires, but he always stood close enough to warm his palms. A smirk, a shrug, a well-timed silence. That was how he chose his side, by never choosing me. By the time I left for college, I'd been kicked out twice. Once for talking back, once because Sarah didn't want to share a bathroom. Winters in Ravenshaw County bite harder when you're standing outside with a trash bag of clothes at 17, pretending the cold doesn't make your hands shake. But survival teaches things comfort never will. It taught me that if I wanted safety, I'd have to craft it myself, brick by brick. So I worked, quietly. I took night shifts, unpaid internships, studied financial planning in a campus library that smelled of old carpet and scorched microwave popcorn. Years later, when I finally moved into my tiny condo overlooking the water, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The concierge greeted me by name. My 6-year-old son finally had a bedroom where no one told him to stay out of the way. He is the one person who never made me feel like I occupied too much space. My parents never understood that my distance wasn't rebellion, it was self-defense. Even when I became a consultant, even after I scraped my life together from splinters, they still treated me like the family's spare part. Sarah remained the star, the golden daughter with the glossy husband, the curated, picture-perfect world everyone bent around. So when I saved for a small trip, a few days carved just for myself, I told no one. Not my mother, not my father, not even Sarah. Silence, I hoped, would buy me peace, but secrets rot quickly in my family. The morning of my trip felt suspiciously calm, the kind of quiet you don't trust, the kind that precedes a storm or a betrayal. I slipped out early, kissed my son goodbye, promising him something small from the gift shop. He waved sleepily, hair ruffled, unaware of the tectonic shift humming beneath my ribs. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. Northcrest Airport buzzed with its usual chaos. Rolling suitcases, burnt espresso, travellers in half-awake autopilot. I blended in easily. Jeans, long coat, hair pulled back. Nothing about me suggested danger, retribution, or the beginnings of a reckoning. But inside me, something long suppressed was waking. Slowly, quietly, like rage thawing after years of winter. And soon, my family would feel it. All of it. Nothing about that morning hinted that, within minutes, the story I told myself about my family would split clean down the middle. At the check-in counter in Northcrest Airport, I slid my ID and confirmation code across to the agent, already picturing the small ritual of freedom that waited for me. Boarding, buckling in, turning my phone off, disappearing. The scanner beeped once, then again. The agent's face shifted. Barely. But I knew that look. Not confusion, discomfort. "Let me just check something," she murmured, fingers flying over the keyboard. A knot curled under my ribs. "Is there a problem?" She angled the screen just enough for me to see. "Your ticket shows as cancelled. The refund was processed about an hour ago." Cancelled. The word landed like a heavy suitcase to the chest. That's impossible. I didn't cancel anything. "The refund went to a card ending in..." She hesitated, as if the last digits might cut. 4442 as what I won. I didn't need to think. The floor dropped away beneath me because I knew exactly whose card that was. My mother's. Somehow I managed to thank the agent and step aside. The terminal around me sharpened. Too loud, too bright, every rolling suitcase a jolt. As I reached for my phone, it buzzed in my hand. A text from Mum lit up the screen. "Have fun walking home. Loser, no emoji, no fake softness. Just that word, cold and precise as a blade." Another buzz, another message. "Stop pretending you're not broke. Take a bus like you should." The letters blurred, then snapped back into focus. People streamed around me, a river of strangers with lives that didn't include this kind of intimate cruelty. For a second, I couldn't tell if I was standing still or sinking. It wasn't the cancelled ticket that gutted me. It wasn't even the insults I'd heard dressed in prettier clothes 1,000 times before. It was the sudden, merciless clarity. They didn't just see me as a burden. They enjoyed it. My humiliation was entertainment. My pain was their private joke. My mother hadn't just sabotaged a trip. She'd taken a cheap shot at my independence, and it thrilled her. That realization turned every old wound raw again. I walked out of the terminal into the cold, not entirely sure where I was going, only that I couldn't stay another second under those fluorescent lights. My fingers trembled as I opened a rideshare app, rage and numbness wrestling in my chest. Before I could finish typing my address, a small white sedan rolled up to the curb. The driver leaned out the window. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like somebody just dropped a piano on your day." I let out a sound that hovered between a laugh and a sob. "Close. Just a couple of texts." He studied me for a heartbeat, eyes soft but sharp, like he could see the boiling hatred I was trying to keep from spilling over. "Hop in. I'm off shift, but you look like you need to be anywhere but here." I hesitated only long enough to register that it was the first offer of kindness I'd had all day. Then I slid into the passenger seat. The car smelled faintly of pine and worn leather. "I'm Harvey," he said as we pulled away. "Part-time driver. Lived in Ravenshaw my whole life." He didn't push. He just drove and listened, the way people do when they've seen enough quiet disasters to recognize one forming in the seat beside them. The words tumbled out of me, about the cancelled ticket, the messages, the years of swallowing comments that should have been thrown back like knives. I heard myself describe patterns I'd always minimized, and for the first time, they sounded like what they really were. A long, slow punishment, disguised as parenting. When we finally parked near a nearly empty city park, Harvey rested his hands on the steering wheel and said gently, "People call cruelty love all the time. Doesn't make it less cruel. Doesn't make it love." His voice was calm, but what he said felt like a verdict. A quiet, grim atonement the universe had been holding back until I was ready to hear it. I stared through the windshield, watching winter light filter through bare branches like veins against a pale sky. My phone felt heavy in my hand. This time, I didn't open their messages. I opened a folder I'd hidden for years. Options, investments, payments, the trust deed, line after line of proof. Every month, they were late on the rent for the house they lived in, blissfully unaware that the landlord they half respected and half resented was me. For a long moment, I just breathed, my pulse a steady drum. Their anger no longer felt like it was drowning me. It was sharpening me. All those years of pent-up rage, unresolved grievances, every open wound, they weren't weights anymore. They were edges. When Harvey dropped me near my building, the cold had turned crisper, almost electric, the kind of air that forces you fully awake. I thanked him, told him I'd be fine. For once, it didn't feel like a lie. I walked toward my entrance with a strange, deliberate calm. My condo lobby was warm, humming softly with the radiator's low breath. Crossing that threshold felt like stepping out of their narrative and into my own. I hung up my coat, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Retribution, I realized, doesn't always arrive in flames. Sometimes it begins with a login screen and a decision not to look away. The folder, named Options, waited for me like a sealed vault. Quiet, patient, full of truths my family never cared to learn. When I clicked it open, the screen bloomed with years of documents. Investment notes, payment logs, property records, and at the center of it all, the trust deed naming me as the rightful owner of the house my parents had lived in for almost 2 years in Ravenshaw Heights. I scrolled slowly, absorbing the quiet empire I had built while they were too busy belittling me to notice. Every line, every signature, every confirmation email whispered the same reminder. I had created something extraordinary without their permission. They had always mocked my simple clothes, my old car, my quiet habits. They assumed modest meant weak. They never understood that I kept my life small only to keep it safe. From them. But the texts at the airport had changed something fundamental. Protecting myself wasn't enough anymore. I needed to protect my son from the open wounds they kept clawing at, from the cruelty they wrapped in the word family. Memories rose, sharp and unwelcome. Sarah shoving me out into a winter night because her boyfriend didn't like extras around. My mother rolling her eyes while I stood outside, trembling with cold, accused of being dramatic. My father handing Sarah cash during her college move-in, then turning to lecture me about earning things the right way. Each moment layered itself over the last, forming a sediment of resentment and quietly simmering rage. I couldn't keep letting them carve pieces out of me and call it love. I opened another file, a set of audio clips I'd unintentionally captured the last time I dropped off a receipt at their house. I had tucked a tiny baby monitor inside my bag because I didn't trust leaving anything unattended. I hadn't meant to record them, but when I pressed play, their voices filled my kitchen, familiar and venomous. "She thinks she's better than us," my mother said. "Cancel it. Teach her a lesson." My father snorted. "She can take the bus. Always pretending she's struggling. Maybe she should struggle." Sarah snickered in the background, the sound careless, indulgent. Their laughter followed, light, comfortable, casual cruelty spoken the way most people discuss weather forecasts. I sat back, letting the anger settle, not as fire, but as ice. Not wild anymore. Precise. A tool. I wouldn't scream at them. I wouldn't match their insults. I would use the one thing they always underestimated, my preparation. By late afternoon, 3 eviction notices sat neatly on my desktop, one for each adult occupying my house. I cross-checked every clause in the lease, every late payment, every violation they had signed without reading. Everything was airtight. Outside my window, the sun dipped behind the lake in shades of muted gold and rose, painting the world with a calmness that felt almost ceremonial. I slid the notices into a plain envelope. This time, my hands did not shake. For years, they'd called me too soft, too quiet, too forgiving. Maybe they were right, but softness becomes steel when it finally chooses itself. I placed the envelope on the counter, inhaled once, steady and deep, and whispered into the empty room. I'm not going back as their daughter. I'm going back as their landlord. 3 days after the airport, I stood at the end of my parents' walkway, staring at the house I once haunted like a ghost. The lawn was untrimmed, the porch light flickering, Sarah's SUV parked crooked as always. Entitlement expressed in metal and carelessness. I tightened my coat and walked up the steps. I didn't knock. I simply turned the handle and stepped inside. The familiar scent, lemon cleaner, stale coffee, old resentment, hit me like an echo of childhood. My mother sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. My father was in the kitchen assembling a sandwich. Sarah was at the island, filing her nails with her usual air of bored superiority. My mother looked up first, irritation tightening her jaw. "What are you doing here?" No greeting, no surprise, just annoyance at the interruption. My father didn't bother turning fully. "Shouldn't you be sulking somewhere? Heard your little trip fell apart?" Sarah smirked, tapping her nail file against the counter. "Yeah, figured you'd still be crying at the terminal. Guess the charity plane didn't leave without you." Their words slid off me like rain hitting stone. They had no idea I wasn't here for approval or forgiveness. I was here for justice, for retribution, for the reckoning they had been earning for years. Their laughter, light, careless, smug, floated through the room like they'd already won. Once, that sound would have sent me shrinking into myself. Not anymore. My spine was straight, my jaw set, my presence unmistakably different. If they'd bothered to really look at me, they would have seen the shift. I wasn't here to be tolerated. I was here to draw a line. I placed my bag on the hardwood, pulled out the plain envelope and set it in front of Sarah. She eyed it lazily. "What's this supposed to be?" "Your notice," I said. "All 3 of yours." My mother let out a scoffing breath. "A notice? For what? Eviction?" A strange hush washed over the room. Even the old fridge seemed to stop humming, as if waiting. I slid 3 copies of the documents into 3 distinct spots. On the counter, the fridge door, the bottom stair like carefully placed warnings. My father lunged first, yanking the page off the refrigerator. "You don't own this house." I reached back into the envelope and withdrew the trust deed, unfolding it with deliberate calm. "You signed a lease with Elmrook Trust 2 years ago." My mother's eyebrows shot up. "We thought that was a property company." "It is," I said. "Mine." A pulse of anger flared across my father's face. "This is nonsense. You can't throw out your own family." "You already did," I replied, "twice, before I even hit 20. Sarah sighed loudly, filing her nails with exaggerated annoyance. "You're delusional. You don't have the kind of money to buy a house." "That's a bold assumption," I said, "considering the mortgage statements, payment logs, and your signatures don't agree with you." My mother stepped forward, temper rising. "Stop this. You think waving paperwork around scares us? We raised you." "No," I said evenly. "You used me, you belittled me, and you punished me whenever I wanted a life you didn't control." My father threw the eviction notice onto the counter. "Even if any of this is real, you still don't have legal grounds." I pressed play on my phone. Their voices spilled into the kitchen, crisp and undeniable. My mother. "Cancel her ticket. Let her learn." My father. "She can take the bus. She likes acting poor." Laughter. Sarah's voice chiming in, mocking, amused. Sarah's spine went rigid. "You recorded us?" I nodded. "I recorded tenants on my property violating a lease, and the emotional abuse they used to keep me small." My mother's face drained. "Turn that off." But the recording kept echoing, each sentence hitting the tile backsplash like thrown stones. Sarah slammed her palm on the counter. "You can't evict us. I have kids. We're a family." "A family you shoved my son beneath last Christmas," I said, "when you told him to sit on the floor because he wasn't a real cousin." Sarah opened her mouth to snap back, but my phone buzzed with a notification. Payment received from Sarah Baxter. Sarah lunged toward me. "You said the rent was delayed." "It was," I answered, "unless you'd rather I bring up how you laughed when I fell down your stairs, carrying presents for your children." She inhaled sharply. "You're unbelievable." "No, I'm consistent." My father tried again, voice thinning. "Where do you expect us to go?" "You had 60 days' notice in writing," I said. "You ignored it. You're 3 months behind, and you sent me those messages." I met his stare. "If a landlord got texts like that from a tenant, what would happen?" Sarah spat. "You're doing all this over one little joke?" "That wasn't a joke," I said. "It was the truth you finally said out loud." My mother clutched the counter, her composure faltering. Jessica, be reasonable. Reasonable? My voice stayed calm as glass. You cancelled my trip. You called me a loser. You told me to walk home. I paused. And you enjoyed it. My father's voice cracked. So you're really going through with this? I reached into the envelope again and drew out the final document, a single sheet that carried the weight of every boundary I'd never enforced. I placed it at the centre of the island. They leaned in, and their faces shifted from irritation to fear. It was the formal notice of enforcement, the authorization giving the sheriff power to intervene. This, I said quietly, is already filed. You have 3 days. My mother's eyes filled, not with remorse, but with the terror of losing comfort she believed was permanent. We didn't mean to hurt you. Yes, I said softly. You did. You just never thought I'd return the consequences. Sarah looked around the room, suddenly small, almost swallowed by the house she'd always strutted through as if it were her private throne room. Her eyes darted, searching for a foothold, a familiar power. She found none. What are you trying to prove? She asked, voice brittle. That I matter? No, I said quietly, my jaw tight. That I matter, and that my son deserves better than watching his mother be treated like an unpaid servant in a house she helped keep standing. My father, now diminished in a home he'd once ruled, threw his hands up in a fury that looked more like panic. Unbelievable, he snapped as if outrage could still control the room. I picked up my bag with hands that trembled only from restraint, not fear. 3 days, I said. The sheriff will handle the rest. As I stepped onto the porch of the old brick house on Alderford Lane, I heard my mother whisper almost to herself, "What happened to you?" I paused just long enough for the truth to sting. I stopped begging for a seat at a table I paid for. Their faces twitched, micro-expressions of guilt, fear, and something darker, the realization that retribution had finally found its way home. I walked away while they stood frozen in the doorway, their lives beginning to buckle under the weight of choices they'd spent years pretending were harmless. Those 3 days passed faster than any of us expected. On Thursday morning, a sheriff's car slipped onto Eastmoor Street, quiet but unmistakable. No sirens, no drama, just the calm arrival of personal justice long overdue. My parents stood on the porch with half-packed boxes, their faces tight with disbelief, as if the world owed them an explanation, a delay, a mercy. But mercy is not part of grim atonement. Sarah, predictably, wasn't there. She'd stormed out the night before, dragging her suitcases across the gravel driveway of Harland Park, screaming into her phone at her husband about the money she had siphoned without telling him. Her voice had cracked with the strain of secrets meeting daylight. The sheriff walked my parents through the process, speaking gently, almost kindly, giving them space to gather the last fragments of the life they'd taken for granted. No yelling, no spectacle, just the slow, inevitable unwinding of a family that had used cruelty the way others use affection. Daily, habitually, thoughtlessly. My mother tried one last time. Her fingers brushed my arm as movers carried out the final boxes. "Jessica," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we're still your parents." I stepped back, the distance between us more final than any locked door. "And I'm still the daughter you never protected." She didn't look at me. She looked at the house, at the illusion of permanence she thought would shield her from the consequences of betrayal and unresolved grievances. When everything was cleared, I handed the sheriff a sealed envelope. Inside, a photo of me and my son, smiling. On the back, a single line, "This is the family I choose." That evening, when I finally returned to my condo overlooking Lake Brinwell, the water lay perfectly still, bright with the kind of peace that feels like a hard-won victory, a retribution completed, a wound finally allowed to close. My phone buzzed once, an unread text from Sarah. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The cancelled ticket, the airport humiliation, the sneering insults, the years of pent-up rage, they'd all led here, to this quiet, undeniable moment when their version of family no longer dictated my worth. My son ran to the door, arms wide, face certain of me in a way my parents never were. That certainty, simple, warm, and untainted, was enough. If you've ever had to reclaim your peace from people who were supposed to protect it, tell me in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.